All right, welcome everybody, and thank you for joining me on this lunch and learn. I hope we, the next 30, 40 minutes or so can have some fun. Pick the topic of surfacing is the next step, and as you can see there, I put in there beginner because this was kind of like one of these topics that I was kind of like a little bit, it's an interesting topic when we're talking about surfacing. Many of us, when we're talking about surfacing, we're thinking about some really complex shapes and things like that. But I really would like to kind of like start, at the ground zero and kind of like work our way through it. By the way, my name is Lars, and you can reach me at lars@catdimensions.com if you like. I definitely take any comments about this. And my thought was that since I put beginner, that we could possibly have a lunch and learn in the future where we get into a little bit more advanced stuff. But surfacing in SOLIDWORKS, well, it's not only for high-end consumer things. I think a lot of people, if you are doing this kind of stuff, then you are using a lot of surfaces. I mean, in the car industry, for example, they have this joke that there's no radiuses or anything. It's all curves and smooth surfaces and stuff like that. And we're going to talk a little bit about that in this lunch and learn here. My idea is really to start, talking about surfacing and how SOLIDWORKS work with surfacing, and kind of like take through some different examples and stuff like that. I really don't want to spend too much time through PowerPoints. But I have kind of like made a couple of slides that kind of like as general rules that I definitely share with any of you. So Lars@catdimensions.com is probably the easiest way to get to those. I can see we still got a couple of people coming in here on the webinar here. So really, let's jump into SOLIDWORKS because that's where the fun is, anyways, right? And I'm running 2014. Yay! It's finally out. Hope some of you guys have had an opportunity to be at our rollouts. We still have a couple left, and there's some great new features in 2014 that we might just come across. Not really prepared to show any of that in regards to surfacing, but as we're getting through. First thing when we're working in here that I like to do, let me just open up a part document here, part inch. First of all, you might have to turn on the toolbar. Right-click on any of these tabs up here, and you can uncheck or check toolbars to get the surfacing toolbar up on here. Another thing I like to point out is settings. So if you go into settings, there's two settings I like to generally turn on, and it's under the feature manager. When I'm working with surfacing, I don't like to turn, well, in general, I normally have the solid body folder set to show and the surface body set to show. It just means that when I hit OK here, that these two folders will always be my feature tree, and you can kind of like keep an eye on it. By default, they will appear if there is one of them in your tree. I just like to kind of like turn them on. So to kind of like start at, I don't know, ground zero or with the basic things, if I go into SOLIDWORKS here in standard extrude and just open up a sketch here, I'm just going to use my S key, and put in a sketch and extrude this sketch out. This should be all pretty familiar to all of us, I hope, right? So now we got kind of like a boss extrude here. This is what we call a solid body, right? And solid body's sitting right up here. Well, so it is true that we can use surfacing for making swoopy surfaces and things like that. But it's important to understand that surfacing is not really the finished result. The finished result is still a solid body. The only difference really is with surfaces is that it helps us create one surface or one face at a time. Where a solid body, as we can see, when we're going to use the extrude command here, it literally just takes care of all 6 sides, right? Right out of the go. Where with surfacing, it gives us an opportunity to really handle each side individually, and that could give us the power of making some of these super surfaces and stuff like that. We can use it for other things too that I will show you here within the next hour or so. So we all know this is a solid body. A solid body is nothing more than a surface body that is watertight. So if any of you sat through my dumb solid presentation, you'll see this. If I go over here, there's a tool on the surfacing toolbar called Delete Face. And if I just set it to the default delete, it literally is going to take this face here and delete it. Well, when I delete this face, you will see that SOLIDWORKS turns into a surface body. Okay, so because now it's not watertight, right? So really, what we have here is a surface body right now. Now, if we put a lid on it and we knit it together, make it a solid, then it will become a solid. So when we're talking in terms of solid versus surfaces, you don't have to know how to construct a space shuttle or anything to be able to work with surfaces. And many times you can work with surfaces with imported models and stuff like that. So it's really just a tool within SOLIDWORKS to get you to a solid state. Matter of fact, if I delete this feature here and just go back to our sketch, I could go in on the surface toolbar and use something like extrude here, and then I could extrude those 4 walls up. So now we got a surface wall. So again, surfaces is just non-thick, there's no thickness walls, right? And if I went ahead and I put a lid on this one here, then it really would become a box, right? So I can use the planar surface here and go ahead here and close this box in. Now it's still a surface body because I haven't told SOLIDWORKS yet, hey, it is a watertight body right now. So SOLIDWORKS just right now sees all these non-thick features. But if I go in and go to the knit surface, and I can actually now select all of them, and I'm trying to use this new lasso selection in SOLID. This 2014 has a lasso selection. So instead of having a box, you can actually lasso select. So I'm trying to get used to use some of these new functions. But if I go in here to the knit surface and say try to form a solid of this, it will now become a solid body. Okay? And all this we saw in here, extruding those 4 surfaces up and close both ends and knit it all together, and then find a solid, is actually what SOLIDWORKS does with our standard command. So there's nothing really magic in this. This is just all the stuff that is going on in the background. So all these features up here that we're familiar with, they're just doing all this surfacing in the background, which is pretty cool, right? So really, that's the point. And if you look at the surfacing toolbar, and we're going to go through some of these here, look at how familiar they are, right? So if you look here, we got on the feature, we got extrude, boss base, and revolve boss base. When we go to the surface toolbar, you got extrude surface, you got revolve surface, sweep, loft. You know, a lot of these commands in here are identical to what we see in our standard features. So there's not really anything necessarily to be too worried about when it comes to this. So back to my PowerPoint here, you don't have to deal with these things or have to make these things to be able to know surfacing. We can actually use it for pretty standard things too. Let me just show you something here. This is kind of like my favorite list here. And again, if you email me, then you can definitely get this these here. So my favorite tools to use in the surfacing toolbar, and the reason that I wrote these here is because some of them I really I don't use. So I kind of like narrowed it down just to make it a little bit easier. Let's get back into SOLIDWORKS, and you know what? Let's go back in here and delete all these, and let's just use the standard boss extrude, right, that we all are familiar with. Extrude that block up there. All right, so that's boss extrude. So if you look at the surfacing toolbar, we kind of like try to work our way through some of these and talk a little bit about the different functions in here. So the first thing is extrude surface, and that's all it really does. I mean, if I go in here, let's roll back here. If I go in on the top plane and start to sketch and just draw a line, like this, just out in space, and I go into surfaces and hit extrude surface, well, guess what it's going to do? It's just going to make from that edge a non-thick plate. Nothing more to it. Okay, it's pretty easy, right? You can actually use that one for a couple of interesting things too. Just to show you, if we go back to our block here, any of you who were at the rollout or coming to the rollout might see me do this. We have a tips and tricks section. I'm talking about how we can create reference planes. So if you had to blow a hole in an angle through this block, you might go into reference plane and go in here and create an offset and then select an edge. This will now let you create an angle in, or a plane at an angle. So just some of you guys have maybe seen this if you were to the rollout, and now I have a plane at an angle that I can sketch a hole on. I'm getting distracted here. Sketch a hole on here, and I could blast a hole through that. So this how many people will do this, right? So now if I go in and say extrude cut, it's going to cut into the part with an angled hole. But you could actually use surfaces for the same thing. And I've seen people do this if they want a little bit more control. If I go in here on the front plane and open up a sketch, I might want to control that angle of that plane I want to sketch on. So if I went in here and I sketched a line and use my mouse gesture and get an angle on it here, right? Let's make it 30 degrees or something. So now I got this sketch line here. If I went in and I used the extrude surface, and we could go mid-plane, for example, now this is a surface. If you actually look up in my folders up here, we have a solid body here, and then we got this surface I just created. Well, there's two places we can sketch the SOLIDWORKS, right? There is either on a face or a plane. Well, this just became a face, and now I could actually sketch right on this surface here that I just created, and I could use that to drive my extrude cut, right? And now extrude and cut through here. Now, it's very common when we talk about surfaces to sacrifice surfaces or maybe just hide the surfaces. The hole is still there, right, cutting through. And now if I go in and I edit that sketch, now I actually have that angle right there. So, one way that you could use a surface as guidance, the angle of a cut. And this is legit. This is not necessarily a bad modeling practice, right? This could be that you're working around with different holes, and this is the way you prefer to actually control that, or do it with equations or whatever you're up to. So, important to know that these surfacing tools are right there and they're right available, and stuff like that. Now, why would we go in and use these surfaces? It could be because the geometry actually is looking for it. Now, one thing is if you got to create a car or something like that, or something crazy, then you maybe would be looking to use it. But even also for shapes that maybe is not that crazy. If you're looking at this shape here, this part here, we can all agree on this one is not that complicated, right? And you will see this is actually a solid body that I have here. If I jump back and we look at the skeleton of it, this is kind of like the sketches that I built it up from. We could say that we could do this. We could surely do this in SOLIDWORKS, right? With standard commands. I mean, I could go in here and say, all right, I'm going to create a boss extrude, and I'm going to start from here up till here. So now I kind of like got this rectangle, or this block that is following the bottom one, and then I maybe would open up a sketch on this face here and maybe do a convert entities to steal this edge, and now I could sketch the remaining and maybe do like a swept cut, something like that. So I could do something like this here, and now if I went in to do a swept cut, so this is going to be my profile, this is going to be my maybe this is going to be my path here, and we see that it cuts all the way around. So maybe I'm going to right click here. You can select the selection manager maybe, if you're familiar with that one, and you can select a unit maybe, or something. There's different ways we can do things in here, right? We may select the bottom here. So this looks pretty good. Maybe we need to get a guide. So you see what I'm doing here is I'm kind of like trying to anticipate how this cut's going to be, and I might get something pretty close, but I've kind of like lost the design intent of this part because it's a development. I didn't even get the end right over here, right? So I might have to play around. Maybe this guide curve is not good. So what happens then? Then I cut the corner off. What happens here is that SOLIDWORKS is trying to anticipate all the different things that we wanted to do with these cuts. Because when we're using the solid function, SOLIDWORKS would actually always try to, make it a solid, right? So we keep it watertight and stuff like that. Now, what we could do was we could actually do all this with surfaces instead, okay? So if we go in here and we look at it, we could actually create these surfaces just standard from here and be happy with it. So if we go to the surfacing toolbar over here, we could go in and say, all right, you know what, I'm going to create something like, well, if we're looking at the front face here, we might say we want to create something like a loft. Actually, I don't use the loft tool most of the time. I use the boundary tool. And if I go into boundaries, I could select one edge, I could select another edge here. I would get kind of like a planar face, and then I could select direction 2 over here on this edge, and it will snap to that. And maybe I select the other edge down here and kind of like get this snapped in as my guide curve down here. And now I have that box there. And then I just got to do the tops and the bottom of this plate here. So actually here you could use the planar face like I did before. I actually like to use the fill command instead. It will do the same thing, and it's much smarter. I'm going to talk about the fill in a little bit. Just select the different edges. You see how it actually gives us a grid sign here, and I could do the same thing on the bottom. So what I have done with this is that I'm not really having SOLIDWORKS trying to figuring out all the different edges, right? I'm building right on the skeleton on a 3D sketch, and my design intent is withheld. Now, when it comes to actually turning it into a solid, like I said before, surfaces is just kind of like the start to the end. You still need to finish it up as a solid body, and I can do the same thing as I did before. I can go into the knit surface, and I can just select the whole thing. I got to select the whole thing to be able to do this. This lasso selecting is interesting. If I selected everything, I can form it into a solid here, and now it's a solid body. And I kind of like kept that design intent, right? Because if I go into my sketches in here where I have some dimensions, I kind of like place it like that. So surfacing like that can be a good alternative for that when it comes to working with surface inside of SOLIDWORKS. So think of it like that, right? Think of it like what you know, what you have, and you can build these frames up and again create a solid model like this, and you now kind of like have the true of what you want instead of trying to I don't know, I want to say cheat your way through it with the solid bodies here. All right, so just a couple of examples. Just wanted to kind of like show some of the different things you can do with it here. So let's get back into the SOLIDWORKS and into document. So we got the extrude. I showed that one before. We also got revolve. Now revolve works pretty much just like it does in SOLIDWORKS. So if I open up a template here on the front here and I just sketch a line straight up here, make a construction, then I could sketch another line, an angle, and if I went into my surfacing toolbar and did revolve, well, then I would get a lampshade, right? And again, we could do this in SolidWorks. We could do that with a standard revolve, but just to show you, it works the same way. It's kind of like the same mentality, except that in this case here, SolidWorks is not really trying to do all the math of trying to create, a solid out of it and then keep it watertight. We could build this up ourselves, pretty straightforward. Another thing, the next one over is the sweep, and the sweep, I wanted to show that one just to kind of like get in and draw some things up here. So I'm gonna use a pattern metric here, and I just wanted to show and talk a little bit about how we can work with surfaces and in regard to the swoopy surface and stuff like that. So if I go into my right plane and start a sketch, be straightforward. We have our standard sketch tools that I've used so far. Many times people will also use splines. Now, if you never used splines before, some people have a tendency when they're using splines to kind of like, you may be tracing something like a line or a picture or something like that. People kind of like had a tendency to click and click and click and click and click, and you get up with all these different spline points. What that does is it gives us a spline that is very hard to control, right? Because splines can kind of like go everywhere. The trick is actually to do less. So if I go in here and open up a spline here, and I'm just going to do a 2-point on it. So I'm just going to click and click, and then I'm going to hit escape. So I'm getting out of it. Now, this spline is just pretty much a straight line right now. If I click on it, you will see that I get these spline handles, and I can grab here and I can kind of like move things, and I can start on these diamonds. I can kind of like start swinging them around like this. I can actually grab the ends and I can pull in them and stuff like that. And many times starting out with 2 is really the best way if you have it kind of like your 2 endpoints. You can always right-click on it, and you can actually add another spline point to it if you want to. So now you actually get another set of handles. So I always tell people, start out with just 2 points and start out working with that. Now, another thing when we're working with splines is that many times we were making help lines for our splines, and that could like be construction geometry. So let me go over, click a line here, and just make a line that is horizontal. I'm going to hit escape and turn it into a center line. And now I could actually go in and control select my spline and my construction line here, and you will see that I get the options for making a tangent. Okay, many times people will do that. Now I kind of like have created a control of the spline here, and I can't move it up and down, but I get a control of it now where I can only move it back and forth. So many times when you're working with splines, you're actually creating this kind of control lines to not really use to other than guide things. And you can actually also do that for surfacing. So let me just go ahead here and finish putting some dimensions on this part. What I'm really trying to do is I'm trying to make a sweep, and I'm trying to create some guides for my sweep here. So I'm just going to give this here a couple of dimensions. So bear with me from here to here, just to kind of like make my life easier when it comes to actually defining these. Make this one here and this one 32. So I sketched this one on the right plane. There's not really any specific voodoo about this spline, other than at this point here we kind of like have these different dimensions. We have made it tangent down there, and we now kind of like have the control of the spline like this here. So that's kind of like on our right plane. And many times we don't fully define spline. So this is one sketch. This is going to be one curve. I'm going to go ahead and make one on the top plane that's going to be kind of like my other curve. So again, splines, you can literally go in, you can just select 2 points, start out with that. That should be your first beginning. Now another thing you can do here that can be pretty handy here, let me get back in, I go normal. So this one is that I can actually go in here and just make sure that these two are the same height here. maybe I go in and create a couple of more dimensions from here to here. Let's make this 25, and the overall length is going to be the same, 38 from this point to this point. You'll see in a second what we got here, and 36 to the origin here. So again, the spline actually looks like it's fully defined at this point, but again, if I click on it, I kind of like get these handles here to do things. Now, one of the things you will see when I sweep the thing here is that's important to know is curvature on a spline. Now, if I right-click on it here, I can show curvature comp. What will show these small lines, and these lines actually kind of like show us how the spline is reacting, how smooth it is. And this is for if you are making consumer products, you can't actually see this in real life. But this is actually what you see if you're standing out in the parking lot and you look down the side of your car. This is actually, you know how when you look down your side of your car, you kind of like see the reflection is going smooth all the way down the side of the car. They're controlling this by making splines that is not kind of like cutting into itself, that is sharp like this. They're making sure that the curvature is smooth. So if I go in here and maybe create another construction line here, and I can go in now and do the same thing as before, make a relationship and make a tangent. I can now make sure that I get a smooth creation like that. So what I have here, let me turn that off again. Show curvature, turn it off, right click on it. So I have two kind of like guides on a shape here. So these here are not really doing anything except they're going to guide my sweep. So now I'm actually ready to make the shape of my sweep. So that was a long talk about this. So I'm going to open up on my front plane, where those two other sketches kind of like intersects with. And I'm going to open up a sketch, and I'm going to do again. I'm just going to do a spline. And again, I'm just going to select out in space here, 2 points. Now, one of the relationships that I love to use when I'm working with splines, if I hit this endpoint here, and I hit Control Select the other guide spline, I actually get a pierce. Now, pierce is like coincident, except that it's literally locking it down to the two are touching each other. So just so you know that the pierce relationship is preferred over a coincident relationship when you're working with splines. Now again, I can take this spline here, I can work with it here, you know, maybe make some different relationships, making some other different construction lines to control this one. But just to get to the end here, when I have this here, I could now go in and do a sweep. And this would become my profile and then my path. I could select one of these, and you will see that I'm now going to sweep along that path. However, I actually prefer to keep it simple, stupid. So what I normally like to do when working with this kind of stuff is to actually go in on the top and create a construction line that's going to be kind of like my dummy line here for my path. So I add another sketch, but what happens is that when I go in here and sweep this and I select that as my path for this sketch here, I select my profile and then my path here, you see how it becomes straight, right? Because it's just following that guideline there. And now I can use guide curves to actually pull this surfacing shape into the direction what I want. So what I'm ending up with here is this kind of like organic shape. All right. So trying to show how we can really control the shape here without really, you know, we're not overcomplicating things, but we're pulling with these guidelines here. Now, one of the things that is easy when you're working with in a surfacing environment is to use symmetry. So if I had the desire to get the same one over here, I can actually go over and use a pretty standard tool like mirroring. And if I mirror this thing over my front plane, select my surface, you will see that I now have that kind of like shape there. So that could be one of the ways that you can kind of like control this kind of shape. So the swept surface don't really work much different than you really would think of it as a solid, except that you just kind of like have this flexibility here. Now, another thing I'm going to draw up here on the top plane is I'm actually going to add a couple of sketch geometries to this and just kind of like sketch something out like this here. Come down to this corner. Make sure this is horizontal here. Many people will tell you that you should use, at this point, could use the planar surface, right? I'm just going to make it flat and select the current sketch, and you can make it planar. But I actually never really uses the planar much. What I use is the fill surface. Now, the fill surface is pretty magical. What it does is it really looks at your entities here and will let you just select edges and fill it in with whatever you have. And I have another example I'm going to show you in a little bit. Now, I maybe wanted to mirror those two, so let me just, well, we can't do that now. So we could go ahead here and thicken this now. So I just created one of these. That's fine. So now we want to turn it into a solid. We can now go ahead and use the thicken command. But before we do that, let's turn this. You see here we got three surfaces. We got the first one, we got the second one, we got the third one here. We can actually knit all those together to one surface. Okay, this cowboy selection doesn't work for me. Box selection. If I select all of these surfaces and say that I want to knit them together, I have to select them. You will see that now I turn down to being one surface. And this one surface can now be thickened. And when it gets thickened, we will now actually end up with a solid body. So the thicken tool on the surfacing menu here is a quick way to turn something into solid. Really what it does is it just offsets the surface out in whatever thickness you have it into, and then it will become a surface body here. So just so you know that this is kind of like what SOLIDWORKS kind of like does in the background. I got a couple of other examples to kind of like show on that. So Revolve Surface works the same way as it does inside of our features. The guide curves can be used to control it, but try to keep it kind of like keep it simple. I think I'm going to just show quickly about the boundary surface versus the lofted surface here. I normally use the boundary surface. I think it's more preferred. So let me just open up another model here that maybe hopefully can show this a little bit easier here. So let me see what I got here. Open up. I got a couple of sketches here, and these sketches are actually just, if you open them up, they're actually 3-point splines. So spline, spline, point, and point, right? So click, click, click on the spline. I made the construction geometry and made it tangent to those ends and brought it out like this. And then I kind of like create a couple of planes on the same endpoint of that spline point and one on that spline point. So what I want to show here is that, well, let's finish this one up here. So I'm going to go in and open up a sketch on plane number 2, and I'm going to do another spline. Select this point right there, and I can go down and select that other endpoint there. Again, I can hit escape, and now I have a spline there that I can go out and kind of like adjust the way we want, right? Let me go up and create one of the other plane up here too, so we can just kind of like see how this kind of like flow together. So we can again, for a couple of spline points there, and again we get that control with the different arms. So here is when we're looking at the loft versus the boundary situation. So if I go in and hit a loft, I can go in and select this as a profile and this as a profile, and you will see that it makes straight transition all the way over there. Works great. We can go in and select part of these as our guide curves coming along here, and this is how we many times could do it in SOLIDWORKS, and it worked fairly well. One of the things you will see though is that it only guides it. So you can see how the yellow line here, how we got a gap there. we kind of like, it's only meant as a guidance, where the boundary surface actually pulls in the same way with all four ends. So it goes in here, and if we click here, we get the same thing, but when we go down to our direction 2, it's actually going to stretch it about the same around here. But you actually see that because it's not just using it as a boundary, it actually pulls equally all four sides. So that's why I'm getting this showing up here. Now what you can do, I don't know if you know this, but you can do is you can actually, if we right click here and select the selection manager, I can select these. You can actually grab these points if you just want to use them as a guide, and I can pull them back. So now I'm still getting an error on that one. I'm not sure why. Let's try this one here. So we can actually control where those starts. I'm not sure why it didn't like the first one there, but it likes the second one. So that's how boundary surfaces really, it pulls it out down to the edge there. It's interesting the top one is not happy. All right, look at that, right? Selection manager, right click selection manager, select the edge, pull it back here, see if it can do it. No, there's something going on with that. But that's the difference between the boundary surfaces that we have here. Now, the fill surface, again, the fill surface works on 2, 3, 4, 5 faces, or edges. So the fill surface can actually fill this in here. So if I go in here and I select these edges, you will actually see that the fill surface would actually go in and create a surface that would fill that void in there. So that's pretty neat that the fill surface can do that it can go in and create those. All right, so I'm going to try to kind of like move through this. So the planar surface I normally really don't use. I use the fill surface instead. Like I said, you're just selecting the edges, 2, 3, 4 edges, and it will try to fill it up. Offset surface will do what it says, right? It will offset a surface, but it actually has 2 different things in it. If I select the offset surface, you'll see that it comes in with a kind of like a distance. So if I select on the offset, it will try to offset that surface out. But if you make it 0, then it turns into a copy surface. So now you can create multiple surfaces, copy one surface. Why would you do this? Well, even in standard working in modeling, you could use this. Let me get out of this. I'm not going to cancel out this. Let's open up another part here. If I go in here and open up this part here, this is a SOLIDWORKS part, right? It's a boss extrude. It's the boss extrude here that I went in and I just extruded up with some taper on it, okay? And then I selected some fillets, so it's a fillets all around. Now, if I go in here and went and said that I'm going to extrude, I have a sketch on the bottom here. If I said that I was going to extrude this one up through the part, we do have an option inside of SOLIDWORKS where we can say offset from surface. But it only lets us select one surface. So if I select this top surface, I will get this here, right? So I could offset this surface up here reverse offset, and I could get something like that. But if I delete this feature, let me show you something where surfacing might be kind of handy. If I go into offset surface, look here, I don't have any surface bodies, and I go into offset surface, but instead of putting a height in, I'm just going to make it 0. And I now select all these different faces here. And I hit OK. Now I get a copy of that whole thing, of the faces, right? So if I go in here, let me go in and hide my solid body for a second. It's a shell, right? It's just a pre-shell, nothing other than just a shell. turn the solid body back on. If I'm going to do the same thing as I was trying to do before, let me go ahead and extrude that one up and say offset to surface, but instead of selecting that top surface, I'm actually going to go in and select that surface copy that I created. Oops. Offset from surface, select that surface copy. I can't select that. Yay. Offset from surface. I'm just going to select it here then. And reverse direction. Where are you? So then it is not doing as I wanted to. You go that way, reverse, there we go. See what it happens now is that it actually will offset up to that surface using this surface here. And so just by making a copy of it. Now this surface here is really not useful for anything. I might just go in and hide it so it's not being in my way, right? That's one thing you could do. You could actually also, because SOLIDWORKS is feature-based, you could actually also select the surface and hit delete and put in a delete body for it, and now it's just sitting as a delete body down here. But that is a copy surface tool that could be used for something like that. In here, maybe that could be kind of handy for a thing. Another thing I want to show that you might could run into in just standard modeling with SOLIDWORKS is I have this handle here, and let me just roll back here. So really what it is an extrusion with a swoopy surface on it. And what happened was they put in the Hole Wizard flatheads here, but Hole Wizard only cuts in one direction. It doesn't cut in two directions. So right now the SOLIDWORKS can't solve this in really a good way, and this could just be troublesome to get through. Well, again, using surfacing tools, we could very quickly deal with this. I'm going to do the same thing as I did before. I'm going to go in and steal this surface here from the Hole Wizard hole. So if I'm going to say offset surface, I'm going to again make it 0 so it becomes a copy surface. And I'm just going to do it on one of the sides here. Select that face. Now that surface sits right here, that copy of that surface. I'm going to right click and isolate it so we can just see that. Now we could go in and use something like inside the surfacing menu like extend surfaces, and we could actually extend those edges up. Again, SOLIDWORKS just sees this as a non-thick feature, so it's not really too concerned about doing all the math. But now where I have this shape here, this lamb shape here, if I go in and exit out my isolate, we can see that surface sitting right here. Now I can use a tool like cut with surface. And I can just say I want to cut everything that this surface is interfering with, right? And then it will show up there if you don't do it the right way. So now you could actually cut with that extended surface, flip the direction the other way, and it will cut that thing out. Now this surface is not worth anything anymore. It's just sacrificing its surface. So again, if I select down and over in the tree and hit delete, it deletes it out. And I just solved that there. So I hope that some of these things here is kind of like a way to show how you can work with surfacing within SOLIDWORKS and kind of like use these surfacing things here. Another example I wanted to give you was another case that you can run into here. So this could be kind of like a, I don't know, lampshade or a something for a base or something like that. If you had to model this thing up inside of SOLIDWORKS using all solids, I don't know, sometimes when you're sitting here looking at things, you're kind of like trying to figure out where should I start or how do I begin with this. Well, what I did with this part here, let me just roll you back through it, was I knew that this thing's going to come in at an angle. It's kind of like be flowing around in kind of like a shape like that. So I really did what I did before when I was showing you the different surfaces here, was that I created, well, maybe it's easier if we just delete these out of there. Let's see, thicken, boundary, delete some of these sketches out of here. And I'm going to delete this curve too. Okay. So what I knew was, I knew that I was going to kind of like create a surface here that is hidden, and that is just kind of like a cone shape. So that was just creating literally a line like I did before and just revolved around it. So I knew that, and then I broke it down mentally, right? Because I knew that what I wanted was a shape up on my surface that looked something like this. Now, this is just a 2D sketch I did here. So then inside SOLIDWORKS, there is a tool that under Insert Curve that is called Project. So what I can do is I can take my simplified 2D sketch that I could easily draw up, and I could actually project it up on the surface that I created, and that gave me kind of like that swoopy surface around there. Now with that said, I could go ahead and hide that shade, and now what I used was either I created a circle here on a plane, and now I could use either something like a loft or a boundary to create the shape here, right, as a surface. So now I'm actually using the loft. So now I have kind of like the surface, and again with the surface we can actually go in and thicken that, and when we thicken it, SOLIDWORKS is going to make it a watertight solid. So that's kind of like how you can go in and create some of those things. And I think that that's really when you're working with surfaces, is to break it down. I actually have a PowerPoint slide here I can quickly show you that I borrowed from Charles Culp, who does a lot of surfacings in here. And thinking of surfaces, and I'm not going to read them all through, but you know, always start with what you know. So if you got to use, you know, like we did with that wireframe sketch, you kind of like know the frame, and then we applied our surfacing around it and knitted it together. Really think, also if you think like in meshing or in boundaries like that, that can make kind of like make it easier to break things down. Again, this PowerPoint, if you want this PowerPoint with these things in here, email me at lars@ketnamissons.com and I give them to you. I will also give you this last part that I have here, and I just couldn't help myself. I had to go in and I literally downloaded this one from GrabCAD, and I didn't see who I downloaded it from. I should have, because to give the guy the credit for it, for an Audi surface body here, and he's using these different tools that we have used here. Really, the way he's done this, we just should break it down quickly, is that he imported sketch pictures, and you can do this. You know, you can Google these or something like that. So you kind of like have these sketch pictures from the manufacturer. I actually believe that there's websites that will give you this, so you can even start, you know, with these here. And what he really did was starting building up these different and building the surfaces around this, using the tools that we've already looked at up to this point here, with building these different frames. So again, if you go back and look at something like our surfaces here, what you can do is, if you start playing around with surfacing and you want to do some swoopy surfaces, is to kind of like have these build up these guides, these shell, almost like a boat hull or something like that, and then you can start using, you know, these different tools to kind of like drive drive your surfaces through here. So I hope that this kind of like was a good entryway into into the surfacing tools, kind of like walk you through some of the different ones. You guys, if you want to give me feedback, you want to see some lunch and learns where we only concentrate on, you know, how you can use it with imported models and stuff like that. We can definitely do that. I kind of like want to give an overview of what you can use and do with it. This also gets recorded, so it will be on our website, and you can check it out there if you want to. Again, if you email me at Lars at catdimensions.com, you will be able to see. I will send you the link for the video, I guess. And these couple of PowerPoints that I kind of like just threw together just to kind of like, you know, if anybody gets them, they can kind of like use it as a reference to get started with it. But surfacing doesn't really have to be that complicated, right? Many times you can start out by just making a box and put surfacing on it and knit it together and form it into a solid and kind of like get that working from that point. It's very flexible, right? Again, because you are building one face at the time. So I hope that this was helpful for you guys to kind of like get into this, and we want to get further into digging deeper into things and try to maybe model something up with surfacing tools. Then I'll be more than happy, you know, to put them in the pool for lunch and learn. So you guys give me the feedback. I hope you found this helpful. You know, got any questions? More than welcome to put them in the chat area. See, some people already have, and I will definitely answer those. You know, if not, then thank you and have a great day.